Welcome to the Painfully Faithful podcast, where we learn and relearn to walk with God through life's most difficult moments. Thank you so much for joining us today for episode 6, Mourning and Mercy. I'm your host, Maria McCarg, and today I have a really special guest with me and friend, Ryan. Her and her husband, they are from the Midwest and moved here 4 years ago. And Ryan is a professional ballerina, which is really cool. And they moved here and she was in the Boston Ballet for a few years. And now her and Tyler lead in one of our regions here in the ministry. So Ryan, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Oh my goodness. Of course. This is so special. Such a good morning with just to be here chatting with you, and so grateful and honored to be on. So thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. It took us a minute to figure it out, but I'm so grateful that we were able to have this time together this morning. And before we get into the topic, mourning and mercy, I wanted to ask you about being a professional ballerina, because that's just, really cool. You probably get that a lot. That's just one of those cool things about you. So I was just curious, like how you got into dancing or just becoming, there's so many of us have a dream one day to be, or had a dream one day to be a ballerina, but how you became one and what it was like dancing in the Boston Ballet. Now, I had the privilege of getting to see you dance in the Nutcracker, Isabella, my daughter and I, which was cool, but just wanted to ask you a little bit about that.
Yes. Yeah, definitely not an everyday occupation that you run into. But
Right.
I remember that. I remember when Isabella came, we came backstage. Oh my goodness, it was so fun to
So
see.
fun.
Yeah. So when it comes to ballet, so my mom danced growing up, when she was growing up, and she was really, really into it kind of prior to college. And then she's very musical, so went more the musical route after college, but she was doing some part-time teaching once she had her family. And so me and my siblings were all just kind of put into ballet at a really young age, like my brother included. We were just all like, and it was so fun. It was at a very just recreational level. And then actually there was a Christian who had come from Boston, actually, who was at the church in Cincinnati where I'm from, who came and kind of saw me dance and was like, oh, like if you want to do anything with this, you can, but here's what just gave me some great advice. Like, here's where I would go to get the kind of training that you need. And it's funny. I definitely felt like I was a dreamer when I was little of like wanting to be a professional ballet dancer, but I more so was just like, I just like never want to stop doing this. Like, it's just so fun. So it was really kind of, it was really special to me, just feeling, and God, I feel like just kind of like kept, I was kind of seeing, okay, how far can I take this? I went to school for it in college and at a music school in Indiana, and then came to the Boston Ballet. And it just felt like he was just blessing me to be able to live out a dream, which was so fun. So that's kind of how I got into it. And it was so fun. It was like, it was such a fun career. I remember waking up, going to work and being like, I can't believe I get paid to do this every day, which still kind of feels like my life in ministry, to be honest. But at the same, but like, it was just really special to have like those 3 years where I was able to live it out in the professional realm. So it was great. And Boston's a great place to be, great company, great people. So it's fun.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. That's so cool. It's cool to hear your story. And so now just, even transitioning, talking about the ballet and, even your transition here to Boston 4 years ago. I know a lot happened right when you got here. And so I was just wondering if you would be okay with just sharing what your experience was like that even brought about this topic, mourning and mercy.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Tyler and I moved here to Boston 4 years ago. I had just graduated college in 2018, and it was for the Boston Ballet job. So I had kind of been auditioning around. We were engaged at the time. And I was like, all right, wherever I get a job, we're going to go. And he was super supportive and kind of along for the ride. He had definitely always wanted to do ministry, but was kind of like, we'll see what happens, what God does. And
Yeah.
God was, amazing and so kind and generous. And we were able to, I got the job with Boston Ballet. He actually got a job working for the Central region out here, and which has been an act of God as well, I think, just through what was to come. But yeah, so we were excited. We graduated, got married about a week later. So lots of transition time, and
Yeah.
pretty much went on our honeymoon and then moved to Boston, which was really exciting. New marriage, kind of starting this new job that I had been dreaming of for a while. And we had been here for about a week and a half, and I was kind of figuring out, I think we had met with a couple people in the church, didn't really know anybody. But about a week and a half into it, I was for the ballet already. So I was there actually. And I got a call from my mom. I actually got a voicemail. I checked it during one of my breaks in rehearsal. And she had basically just said, Dad's been in an accident, please be praying. We thought maybe it's a couple broken bones, maybe not a great situation, but she didn't seem too anxious actually in the voicemail. And I just had this feeling. I was like, I almost didn't call her back during that break. Actually, I was almost like, it's probably fine. I'll just wait till the end of the day to give her a call. And but I was like, no, I think I need to just let my director know I need to just take a step out. And so I did, and I remember kind of where I was, and I called her, and she was actually in the back of a police car at that point at the scene. My dad had just been in a car accident. He was on a motorcycle actually, and someone had pulled out in front of him, and he had pretty much died on the spot. So there wasn't any hospital, there wasn't really any confusion or really any hope, I think, in that sense as well of and I just remember that phone call. I was kind of in this new place of work. My family was all of a sudden, my sister was also there. And I just remember, there's actually very little that I do remember about that time, but I remember that's kind of how our first couple of weeks came into Boston. There were all of these exciting things. And then all of a sudden, my family kind of felt ripped apart. And so there was the grief of loss, which I know many of the listeners, many people have experienced, the suddenness of loss, which is a unique thing and a scary thing in a sense. And I think also just kind of learning to navigate moving forward, what is life going to look like now? My dad was a very spiritual man. He was a wonderful father. And so I think it changed a lot, the dynamic of my family. There's 4 of us kids, and we all navigated grief very differently. And so I think it just left me really confused, emotionally, obviously, theologically, trying to navigate my relationship with God, having gone through loss is challenging, and it's a wrestle in itself. But I think even just so much good, and then there's something so hard, and how do you kind of it felt very easy to focus on everything's hard, because everything felt hard, and even the good things felt hard, I think, when grief hit. And so, yeah, I think it played a lot into, we came back from the funeral, and Tyler and I were kind of in this new marriage, and we were like, okay, what do we do? I'm feeling a lot. I'm navigating a lot. He doesn't really know. I think there were times actually where being in a marriage felt a little bit more lonely, because I would try to explain where I was coming from or what I was feeling, and I wouldn't quite feel like he understood. And And he was wonderful. He was always like trying to do, to
Mm,
his best to relate. But I think
mm,
navigating those dynamics and dealing with coping mechanisms that can come from grief, so sin on both ends, um, and then even like kind of navigating this wonderful career that I had of like going to work every day. And kind of the way the ballet works is that first year I was kind of an apprentice of sorts. I was in what they call the second company.
mm,
So I had about 7 months, I'd say, to kind of before they were to offer me a contract with the first company. And they usually either do that or they let you go, and they're kind of trying to
mm,
figure out like, okay, do we want to have you long term a part of the company, or is this going to be kind of like, yeah, kind of like, is there somewhere better for you?
mm-hmm.
So I felt a lot of pressure to kind of
For
like, okay,
sure.
moved here and like I want to do well in my job, but I think grief affected me a lot in that avenue too. So I think even spiritually, like we had just joined a church, and I'm so grateful for the central region. Those people just have my heart. That church has my heart and really renewed and refreshed my spiritual life in so many ways. But I think at the time they felt a lot like strangers to me. They were strangers. And so I think those are some of the pieces I kind of came into Boston with personally. My husband kind of has some of his own stories as well, but that's kind of what I was navigating, kind of on all ends 4 years ago when we first moved here.
Hmm. Thank you so much for sharing all of that and being so vulnerable. I know, yeah, it's always really moving to hear you share and speak about just what your experiences have been like. And um, yeah, I'm like, I always feel so sorry, like, but we all have our pain, right, that we go through. And I think it's so interesting. So many of us could probably relate to the like really hard at the same time of something good, and like, just trying to balance that or even recognize the good, because the hard really just can mask all of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, and just everybody has a different grief journey. And I appreciate even you sharing how, like each of your siblings, like you all went through or are probably still going through your grief journey in different ways. And even talking about physical pain, I feel like similar, and just the emotional pain, that it's like it could feel so lonely because like there's only so much explaining you could do of
Yeah.
like explaining what the pain feels like. And part of you really has to go through it alone. It's like we need other people, like it's encouraging, like even you sharing about having your husband's support and the church's support, which is very valuable to have that community. But there is an aspect of having to go through it alone. So I just am curious of how, like, what you've learned. You've said like just you've shared a lot, about just kind of going through that with God, and wrestling. And so what are some lessons you've learned, or what are, some things that have come up spiritually speaking, just as you've been going through, your grief journey?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you shared that too, that idea of, I think like just kind of going off of what you're sharing, I think that's kind of one of Satan's biggest tools with us too, is like no one understands, no one.
Oh, totally.
There is an aspect, right, of no one is walking, and I felt that so much. Like I remember,
Like nobody gets me, or nobody's been through this, or nobody understands what it's like.
totally, and I think there's an aspect, right, of like, man, like God gets this, God knows this, Jesus knows this, but other than that, no one has really walked my shoes
Mhm.
exactly. I
Right.
think something I did learn kind of as just like I would open up and hear people's stories is the pain
Mhm.
itself is so universal. Like man, so many people could relate to like hopelessness or like
Mhm.
just intense sadness or um devastation or like shock, like even just the shocking news of like a diagnosis. Like I remember because it was so quick, like an accident.
Yeah.
And I remember like, wow, I actually feel like the grief like the feelings that I can have even with someone who maybe gets a diagnosis that's so hard to navigate. That shock is similar. You know what I mean? Like there's these painful feelings that, but I remember wrestling with that of like, man, I think Satan wanted me during that time to feel like no one gets me, no one understands me. Therefore, no one can speak to what I'm going through, or no one can speak to what I'm feeling. And I think one of the biggest things, there's so many things that I feel like I've learned. It was so humbling on so many accounts, like just showing me this different side of life and this new aspect of suffering that in a way I'm actually really grateful for now, because so many people navigate this as we go through life. But it was so humbling, I think, even with like, wow, like there's so much that I don't understand. There's so much that about people's stories that I don't understand, about my story that I don't understand. But I think it taught me how to really just seek after God's character. Like, okay, who is God within all of this, aside from all circumstances? I just want to know if God can be the same in everyone's life, right? Like in every situation. And there's a scripture that I would just repeat to myself in Psalm 27:8. And I just loved this. This was just kind of a mantra for me. And it's the New Living Translation version that I think I love the most. But it says, "My heart has heard you say, 'Come and talk with me.' And my heart responds, 'Lord, I am coming.'" And it's so simple. But I think it was this idea of like, okay, I'm just going to like get to know God's character through this. Like, no matter what state I'm feeling, no matter what I'm thinking, no matter whether I'm angry, sad, emotional, or feeling, happy when I'm thinking of memories or whatever is coming, like, I'm just gonna like come to God, and I'm just gonna like learn. And I think I learned kind of this, that it's good to have this, it helped me to have this curiosity about who God was, instead of feeling like my feelings defined who God was. I could give my feelings, weight, because they were very real, but that there's a curiosity about like, God might be so different from this though. Let me come and talk to him and just like get to know him. And there were some days where that was so easy. And then there were some days where that was really challenging. But I think I kind of took that idea, that like curiosity, that like, and I saw the way that I think specifically through grief or through mourning, it can be easy to miss kind of that idea of mercy or grace or curiosity about whether it's in conversations. Like one aspect is, I just joined this church, and just nobody knew me. So I can imagine, even from their standpoint, they're probably like, I feel super uncomfortable talking to her, because we don't even know like much about who she is, right? Like, how are we supposed to talk to her? But I remember I remember learning like, okay, like there were conversations that were hard, or conversations where I felt misunderstood. But I remember thinking like, oh gosh, this is so important that I'm like curious about like what they're actually sharing, or even if I don't feel like they can relate to exactly what I'm going through, like there's so much actually that I can learn from them if I'm willing to kind of put down that need to like feel completely comfortable, or to feel like they totally understand everything that's going on. And I think I transferred that even from not just God, like feeling like we can approach God and wrestle with our thoughts, but even, even if someone said something that, wasn't super helpful, like being able to be, what, tomorrow they might say something that's super helpful, like, and even like looking for the lessons that might have even come through those conversations, because I think it can be easy for those things to shut me down. And I noticed that God was just taking that concept and kind of broadening it in so many ways. I think it really opened my eyes to how much other people's stories have impacted them. And I remember thinking, wow, if I hadn't like really stuck in here in this conversation, even though I feel uncomfortable, and like gotten to know some of their story, I might not actually realize how much power is there, how much they actually have gone through, how much wisdom God really has blessed them with, that can really help me and refresh me. And I think, about 8 months after, I think it was in around March, around 8 months after the accident, and I was kind of trying to navigate this idea just kept coming up again, like this idea of just giving the situations around you mercy, or like looking at them through eyes of humility, of like, okay, like I have all these feelings, I have all these things going on, but really when I'm able to kind of like look at these things through eyes of mercy or grace, there's actually so much that God is offering me that I can pull from here. And I think there was a trial that went on because of the accident and the way it happened, where my family actually had an opportunity to meet, you could say, or come in contact with the driver who actually had been responsible for my dad's death. And it was an accident. It wasn't a purposeful thing. It wasn't, it was distracted driver. But I remember coming, to this trial, and they gave us the prompt of like, okay, kind of like share what you've lost. Like, what has this loss, like, how has this affected your life? Basically quantify.
Wow. Yep.
We were just like, oh my gosh, how do you do that? Like, how do you quantify
Right.
what a loss, has meant to you? But I remember, we all got up and we shared a little bit, but we got to just see him. And I remember looking at him and I was like, oh my gosh, he's just a person. It's like he was 23.
Wow.
I just kind of started giving like characteristics to him. And I remember my uncle, who actually had become a Christian or gotten restored to the church shortly after my dad passed. He used that time to just get up there and look at this man and forgive him. He was like, I forgive you. I know my dad would forgive you. And that moment of like, I think when my uncle took that step, I realized like, okay, so this is a furthering of that, to where like this grief has taught me so much humility as I've been navigating it, that I'm realizing like, and everything was just kind of so like, kind of grateful that I navigated all of it at once in a weird way, because it was like, man, like I can't even pretend that I have it together, or that I'm not, saying some unkind things to my husband at times, or really struggling to like serve, or struggling to give people mercy if they might say things that are challenging to navigate on my end or feelings wise. But like all of those things together, like I remember in that moment feeling like, oh my goodness, like this is exactly what it's like to live in the world. Like it's full of sin. It's everyone and everything needs mercy and groans for Jesus to come back. And so I think I remember having a conversation with him after, and it was a really special moment, actually. Like all me and my siblings were able to like connect with him and hug him and share, that it kind of share a moment together that I just never would have even dreamed of wanting to have, I think, prior to God really helping me navigate it. And a scripture that I kept going back to, and I have it actually in my Bible, it's just starred and underlined a million times, but
yeah.
In Psalm 40, verse 1, it says, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire, and he set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand.
Love it.
And I think that scripture, like when everything just felt hard and like everything felt humbling, it was almost like I just felt grateful for God being like, you know what? I'm just giving you a firm place to stand, like in my relationship with you. Like, and I remember like coming to God and just praying for that. And then just being thankful for that, to the point where all the other things that were happening around me that could be easy to feel frustrated by, or that could be tough as I navigated the grief process, I just kept thinking of that scripture. Even with that situation at the trial, I was like, But man, God has just rescued me despite all of these circumstances. And so how could I not show mercy when he's shown me so much mercy? How could I not love or be curious about people when God has shown me so much of that? And also when God just shows so much of us that as humans. And so I think that's been a big thing that I think I've even tried to carry into the moments, because, with some healing, I think, has come, like the Israelites, we go through these miracle seasons and then we can kind of like forget a little bit like what God has taught us. But I was like, I don't want to forget, and I want to live kind of my life like Psalm 40 of just simply being grateful for like a firm place to stand when everything around me feels like it's changing or it's chaos or it's hard. And I think it's totally changed the way that I view other people's stories, the way I view interactions with people. I mean, even the ability to kind of like, navigate differences and all of those kinds of things, because it really comes back down just to Jesus rescuing us from pain and suffering, and that we can then, show other people the same mercy that Jesus does with us. So I don't know if that makes sense. I know that's been a lot of sharing, but
no, it's good. I'm glad you just, I'm thankful that you just, are so open and so vulnerable and so humble. There's so much there with what you said, but I really appreciate the scriptures, and especially the Psalm 40. I feel like that's a great anchor scripture because it's acknowledging, right? Just even the whole theme of this podcast, Painfully Faithful, it's acknowledging the hurt and the suffering. It's like I'm in the mud and the mire. Like that just sounds awful. Like this situation is awful right now, but then I look to the rock, that we can have hope, we can have faith, because we're leaning on God and not on ourselves. And I think us as humans are tested like never before when we go through those difficulties, and being able to be resilient and get through it with God, like really has such an impact on us and our future and people around us, like you're such a blessing to other people. Like it's so easy in those situations. Like I could so relate, that people don't know how to respond when you just got awful news. Like and I mean, I could relate on both ends. I could relate to getting the diagnosis. I could also relate to somebody getting bad news that you don't know very well. And like, what do you say? And I think, I just appreciate your example of being merciful and just being gracious, like giving people the benefit of the doubt, like that it's, you want to be loving, but not knowing what, not like knowing what to say in the moment, and not holding that against somebody, like writing somebody off, like they don't understand me, they don't get me, because we're going through a hard time. That's so easy to do. And then just the powerful story of being, at the trial, and you being able to, that God allowed different circumstances to happen with your uncle, and even what was going on in your own heart, to be able to have that mercy with the driver. And I feel like that is what really frees us, because when we hold on to that hurt, and we don't, offer forgiveness and mercy, like what it really just hurts us. Right. And so I really appreciate that a big part of your story in Mourning is learning how it's incredible how you've been able to learn how God has been merciful with you, and how that's taught you so much about being merciful with other people. That's a valuable lesson and a great example to so many of us. And so I'm so thankful just for this time, just to be able to hear your story and hear the scriptures, and just your journey of how God is continuing to mold you. And I'm so thankful. So thank you so much just for joining me here today. It's definitely been incredible. And thank you so much to everybody who's been listening and tuning in. Please like, and share and subscribe. YouTube and Spotify. You could find me on Instagram and Facebook. And I always share that if you have any prayer requests or have any questions or things you want to hear about, please send me a message. I love to hear from you, love to pray with you or pray for you. And I've been encouraged by the comments. So thank you to those that have reached out. But thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.